Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review more Super Crooks. So, this is surprisingly like a really good show. It's so good, I guess people are kind of finding it and they're like, yeah, I'm really enjoying the show too. Like, so much so that like it has gone into me going like, okay, I guess I'll just continue to review this because really so interesting. It's kind of funny how like Jupiter's Legacy was that Netflix show was like a disinteresting show, but this one, man, is it like they figured out how to put their best foot forward on this show. And you not only have like villains that have interesting powers, and how you're wanting to figure out, okay, how are they going to perfectly team up together, but then you're also seeing a superhero that has like an amazing power skill set like thing where you're like, okay, like this is going to be something interesting for every episode. So uh so in episode 4, we have this buildup of a guy named Praetorian, who is on the tail end of the last episode, who is again going and taking on Frostbite, Transit, Kismet, and Johnny Bolt, and trying to take on these heist villains and using his power to take them down. So, Praetorian, we find out here, and I'm not like I'm trying to tee this up. That's what I'm trying to do here. And so we find out that Praetorian has this wild power. Like he's kind of like a wild card kind of hero, which basically means that this character can have any power, and so that all of a sudden, like, when this guy busts out to the scene, people desperately want to see him because they're thinking like, hey man, we can place some bets and see what power he has, and hopefully we win this bet to see what power he is to like display here. So I'm like, man, this guy probably must have like a lot of villains. That way, like, hey man, keep the bidding alive. So we find out that Praetorian like is a there's this character in the X-Men comic books called Legion, who, if you've never heard of this, there's a whole show about him, and like Legion has like thousands of powers, and but that like with Legion you have thousands of powers in individual personalities, or you also have Dial H for Hero, which we have a character that can dial a certain superhero and become that for a very short amount of time until his dial is to be completed. Praetorian is to have just an infinite amount of power, to the point of even Praetorian not even knowing what power he's going to use for any battle, because it's randomly picked by the randomizer of his body to use against any fight or battle or whatever. So like I'm like, okay, this is really like they really did something smart here. They did something really clever here. And I honestly like the fact that we have these villainous characters with such wild like powers, and you would think that they wouldn't work out, but they just do for some reason. It just weirdly works out. Like there isn't like a Hulk-like character in this group, but man, like, you don't really need one because you just have certain people that have these certain abilities that just weirdly like works with whatever hero is to be sent out to them. It's so fascinating. So that's what really just bottles and takes place into episode 4. In episode 5, we really have to just tell the whole life story of this guy named the Heat. And he seemed to be kind of like a God. I'm gonna try to come up with the DC equivalent. If anyone has seen DC Legends tomorrow, and if you probably haven't, that's perfectly okay. There was to be like Captain Cold, and he, I guess, had a brother that had these like flame like guns in DC Legends of Tomorrow, or I think in the Batman comic books, I think there was a character called Firefly. Basically, the Heat is pretty much that same character. He doesn't actually have superpowers. He just has like heat guns. And so we have the Heat who goes over his entire life story. And I'm going to try to do my best to talk about that as best as I can. And then so the Heat is to get and organize these people together. And so the task that he sends them on is to set up episode 6, where we have some kind of rescue mission that is going to turn around and then be some other mission. And so people, I guess, are going to get very well paid off at the end of this. So, yeah. So, let's get into it. Let's go into that double 5 time territory. Let's just go into spoilers about this one. Thank you guys otherwise for letting me being able to continue to or justify watching more of the show, because I'm like, yeah, I don't know what it is, but like I think people are desperately just wanting like more superhero stuff, because people just kind of easily like and quickly go through a lot of these, and like there's very like rare amounts of like superhero stuff nowadays, even though you could say, oh no, there's plenty of it. Like people like still want to get that real legitimate super powered fix, and I don't think that happens a lot of times, because I think a lot more we're just kind of getting like the common hero like a Hawkeye that doesn't really have like, he has accuracy powers. Ugh, great. Like I want an actual team of characters. I want like an actual like story that has unique characters in it. And there's been a lot of superhero stuff that just hasn't been unique enough. But this show can do that. And that's what I like about it. So let's go into that double 5 if I haven't already. Let's just go into this thing. Let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time we get to spoil this episode. So we start off here as we finished off in the last episode with I'm gonna say Praetorian, and I hope I'm saying that right. I think the last time I said like Praetorian, but I think it's Praetorian. I hope I'm saying that correct. So we find out that Praetorian is to have been like weirdly just found from ancient Rome, and is to come, I guess, to the States to defend it. So Praetorian is to have such a random wild card of powers. I'm like, oh my god, like I actually love that. Like I want a main superhero character besides a possible like Legion or something. Like I want a hero that is to basically be unstoppable, because like I want a character to have unlimited amount of power that he can use at every second, minute, whatever of his life, and be this kind of just like there's no way for a villain to win kind of scenario, because this guy has such a massive ability that would create such massive uh, like characters for him to go against and create very big interesting stories. So, but I digress. So now everyone is placing bets on what Praetorian is going to use as his power this time around against these heist thugs, who, if people had forgotten from the last review, were of course Frostbite, Transit, Kinsman, and Johnny Bolt, and Casey is to make her way into this fight out eventually. So we find out that Praetorian is going to use the power of Spark Division, which means that he is going to multiply from one person to now four. I'm like, wait a minute. So is he going to have unlimited power from every four multipliers of himself? And surefire enough, like, that's it. Like, I'm like, oh my god. So you basically have like a I'm like, my mind is just blown by that, because I'm like, holy crap, so this guy has not only like a big set skill of power, but then on top of that he's going to multiply himself on top of, and so like you're basically, if you were to be scared that you're basically fighting Superman, all of a sudden Superman is going to multiply himself and be multiple Superman. So I'm like, oh my god, that's crazy. That's a pretty good power to showcase here. And I'm really just, I want to like, it feels like we're going to see this character more, so I want to see this character more. I want to see like this guy like going up against like a big massive team where he just decks a bunch of people, because it seems like he was decking a bunch of people when we got to this scene here. So let's get into it. So he chooses Spark Division, and so the first character we see Praetorian fight is Frostbite. And so Frostbite is to try and freeze Praetorian, but that's not going to work, because we just have Praetorian, who of course is to use his fire breath and break out of that. And then we basically just have like Praetorian just mopping the floor with this guy like easily. So just basically like kicking him like a bunch of times and just knocking this guy out. So now Praetorian is to go up against Kinsman, who of course from last episode we find out that this guy has this bad luck like power. And so Kismet decides to try and use his power to have all four of these Praetorians to get bad luck. But this Praetorian is to have this reflection wave to have this be reversed onto Kinsman. And so all of a sudden, Kinsman is just getting hit with fish weirdly. We're like, what the is going on here? And then all of a sudden, there is to be this shark that comes falling out of the sky, and in one fell swoop, like, seemingly, like, completely swallows Kinsman whole, and then falls over. And so we have Praetorian who's like, oh, like, you were crushed. Like, You must have been crushed because, like, Praetorian rips this shark open to find Kinsman still in this shark's body. And so, yeah, Kinsman is now down. So now we have Transit because, like, Praetorian is basically saving Bolt for last. So Praetorian is going against Transit. And so Praetorian is like, are you serious? Like, dude, I have that same exact power as you do. And so we have, of course, Praetorian again mopping the floor again with Transit. And so now we get to Johnny Bolt. And so Praetorian is asking, like, Johnny Bolt, it's hey, weren't you in the, weren't you in, like, prison, like, recently? And, uh, when did you get out? And so Bolt was just like, well, I was in there yesterday. And he's like, yesterday? Really? Like, well, you know what? Like, since, like, you were to have gone on and been in prison yesterday, like, you know what? Like, I'm going to give you a freebie, weirdly. I'm going to go and let all of you just, like, realize that you've probably learned your lesson. And, like, I'm going to let you guys go. Because, like, Johnny, like, you probably have somebody waiting at home for you, right? That is to be somebody that you're going to go back to and, like, stop all this crime business, right? And Johnny's like, well, yeah, like, that's what I'm going to do. And so Batorin is like, well, okay, guys, it looks like you guys have all learned your lesson. I'm just going to go and leave because I think, like, you guys are just going to do the right thing. So we find out that Casey had used her powers to sway Praetorian to do what he had done and leave. And so now Casey is forcing Johnny into the car for them to get the heck out of there. And Transit is using his power to teleport the other guys into this car. And so now they're like, yeah, we got this big score. Yeah. And it's like, well, yeah, but, like, we wouldn't have gotten away with it if it weren't for Casey. So it's like, yeah, Miss Casey, she did this for us. Like, good for her. So so Casey and Johnny are going and having like, another bedroom session yet again, where Casey is to now tell Johnny that, you know what, like, these small jobs that you are to continue to do are to just to get you, like, more and more of a risk. Like, every time you go and you do some small job, you risk that some super is going to put you in jail. So, if anything, how about instead you go after this big, massive score, and then you can finally retire off of that and never have to do any more crimes again? And Johnny's like, well, yeah, that does seem like a good idea. So Casey is to mention that she does have a guy lined up that can possibly give Johnny that kind of score. And he's like, well, who is that? And she's like, well, the Heat. And he's like, who the is that? Like, so within the next episode, we find out who the Heat is. So in the beginning of the next episode, we have this pickpocket who had the ability of going and like, stealing this person's car keys from their purse and walks off to, like, take this woman's car. And all of a sudden, there's to be conveniently some guy noticing what this pickpocket had done. This guy named TK, who we find out will be kind of important to the whole story here. We find TK, who is to go and try and steal this car, and some Captain America looking guy who, when he is to be in costume, is to be called the Gladiator. And I'm like, you know what? Like, this seems kind of random, but you know what? Like, I'll give him a break. Like, there's some interesting stuff coming out of this story. So the Gladiator is to pop in and be like, yeah, I'm gonna go and arrest you. I'm gonna take you down. And so I'm like, okay, this is so weird. So we now transition to supposedly two brothers fighting in some casino. One is named Sammy and one is named Robbie. And they're fighting in this casino, and while they're fighting, they're consistently grabbing chips into their hands. And so their plan was to beat one another up and chop, like I think Sammy chops Robbie's fingers, but again, while they're fighting, we have them consistently grabbing chips. And so these guys eventually leave without anybody realizing that they grabbed so many chips. And so they end up getting a call from a character called Carmine, who we find out is the Heat. So now we find out that a number of people are starting to get a call from a guy named Carmine. And so Johnny and Casey are to get a call. It seems like there are some rando characters that seem to also get a call where we're thinking of, like, okay, like, when are they gonna incorporate them in the story? Weirdly, but there's also this other character called the Ghost that is to also get a call and to come to this place. So we find out that there, of course, is to be this laundromat that is to be called the Heat Cleaner. And so Johnny is to go with Casey to meet the Heat in a place called the Heat Cleaner. And Johnny's like, well, you know what? Isn't this a little on the nose? Like, and so the Heat is just like, well, we're really looking at it like you gotta like have figured out a job that nobody really wants to do and is kind of like hiding in plain sight kind of thing. So now we have to bust out the whole entire origin of the Heat because we have several like newspaper articles that is to tell us about the Heat, either numerous times that he has either gotten arrested or numerous times that he had some connection to somebody somewhere. So we have this Mayor William Hale Thompson, who is to have gotten to be the mayor with this help of this gang called the Chicago Outfit. And so, like, after the time that is to be around the Great Depression, we have certain other people that are to get in the mix because this is kind of like Al Capone kind of time. And we have guys like Tony Accurato and Sam Gicana. And so we have this whole backstory of the Heat. and how he basically was involved with the mafia, but then decided to kind of like strike out on his own to go and be involved in some supervillain group and try and make some money off of that. But I guess he never got involved with the network, and so I guess he wanted to try and keep it that way. Because we find out once everybody's to get into this room together that basically all the network does is get a bunch of villains all together and is to take a certain cut of their pay because they just got this team together and they don't do any of the actual work. They just say, hey, yeah, since we basically just got all X amount of you together to just do this task, I guess we should just get the money, right? Even though it's your life on the line, basically. So in this room, we of course have Sammy and Robbie, the Diesel brothers, and we have Johnny, who is to showcase his power to this team because the Ghost is kind of being a little bit of a jerk here. And so Johnny is to use his power to knock out a whole city block because of Ghost being such an a-hole. And so now we have to tell the backstory of the Ghost, how the Ghost used to be in prison. And so it seemed that the Ghost had gotten such a well-received first impression by some villains, even as a villain of the Heat, that it seemed like the Ghost was to eventually just go on to work with the Heat, just because of how impressive that he was, with just kind of fading in and fading out of seemingly anywhere. So he's kind of like the Marvel character, the Ghost. Like he's basically, or no, like the Marvel character is just called Ghost. Like, so if you saw Ant-Man and the Wasp and you saw the character Ghost, that basically just kind of can be an act. Like, I shouldn't have to like tell anybody what a ghost does. Like, that's basically what the Ghost does in this show. So now that all of that is covered, so they are to now tell us what the first mission is. And so the first mission is to rescue this character called T.K. McCabe, who got caught by the Gladiator and is to be sent off to some Supermax prison. And so he's on this massive airplane, like this military kind of style airplane, where he's going to be sent to the Supermax prison. And so the Heat wants this guy broken out so that way TK can be used for some other caper that they're going to do after this. So Johnny is to know who TK is, and he's like, oh my god, like this guy is going to be really useful for what we have, what we might have in store for what's to happen next. Because we have one moment where TK is fighting the Gladiator, and TK is to kind of take these, what's the thing for him? Containers, like these massive like containers, and are chucking them against the Gladiator, but the Gladiator is to move so easily that he goes and knocks TK out. So we also find out here where exactly the Heat is getting money to fund this caper. And so Casey is to realize that the Heat has some Romanian bottle. And the Heat is like, well, yeah, I went off to go to Europe to go and speak to some villain, which I don't know who the actual guy's name is with the purple and the eye in the middle, the Cyclops eye in the middle. Don't know who he was, but maybe we'll find that out in other episodes, or maybe we'll never know. So it's the only one name that I didn't know who it was. So now we push on to how TK uh, being on this plane, and the Super Max guards are to say, like, yeah, man, like, you're gonna get taken to Supermax, and it sucks to be you. And TK's powers is to, of course, be neutralized, so like he can't actually use his power to break out or whatever, because the villains have to kind of uh, do their best to try to get him out because he can't use his power. So the Gladiator is to decide to go along with these guys because he kind of needs to go where they're going anyways. But really, also with the Gladiator, I just think that he is to probably assume that something is going to go awry here. He probably has some weird sixth sense or something about this. So he decides that he's going to go on this plane, but he's going to just jump on top of the plane and just ride the plane to where they're going. I'm like, okay, this is so interesting. So now what happens is the Heat is to try to convince some secretary of sorts that he needs to go and speak with somebody. And so all of a sudden Johnny Bolt comes in and distracts this woman, and is to tell her that some Cessna uh, plane had been turned on by accident, and some guy had went through this propeller, and they need to go and call the hospital or the police or any number of things. And so this woman scrambles out there to go and call the authorities and stuff like that. So we find out that that person was actually Robbie. And so now, while this girl is distracted, they decide to go and commandeer some plane for the Heat and Johnny to be, of course, driving this plane. And so the ghost is to already be on this plane. And so Sammy is to go and drag Robbie's body into this plane where Robbie's in the bathroom. And so Robbie ends up rehealing his body. So we kind of find out both Sammy and Robbie, the Diesel twins, or the Diesel brothers, are to basically be like Wolverine, where they heal back their bodies. And like, we have it where they make a joke about I think Sammy getting plastic surgery, and they say it's like, well, hey, like, no matter what, like, he does, like, it'll just grow back to that same original face. So like, no amount of plastic surgery is going to be able to fix this guy's face. So we push on. So what happens is, of course, let me kind of reset here. Let me pause here for a second also. All right. So what we do first is we have both Sammy and Robbie who go onto the top of the plane to distract Gladiator, while the Ghost is to go and make his way into the plane to drug, because he uses weapons that I guess are to drug these Supermax guards. And so he asks the pilots, like, hey, do you guys happen to have any weapons on you? And they're like, no. And he's like, okay, great, just sit tight. So the Ghost is trying to trying to crack this number combination to unlock TK. And the longer and longer that they wait, as Johnny's also trying to control this plane with his power, the longer and longer they wait, the more they're going to get to the Supermax prison soon. So, plus also there's still, like, we still have to worry about the Gladiator here. So, Sammy is to jump onto this plane to, I believe, immediately go into a propeller, so, like, he's basically toast. Casey is on some boat, like, down by the ground, thinking that somebody is, either Sammy or Robbie is going to probably need a boat at some point. So Robbie goes and puts up a pretty good fight against the Gladiator, going and having this hammer and smacking the Gladiator. We weirdly have the Gladiator who is to talk about Robbie, and I think there's some, like, repeated lines that he has to say here, that he hates people with powers like Robbie, and, like, people with powers like him have no discipline, and so on and so forth. So we have where Robbie is to really just be a distraction here. Like, Robbie is to kind of break his jaw, and he, like, reconnects it, and, like, the Gladiator is to rip off this guy's arm and rip off this guy's leg, and then Robbie is to go and grab the Gladiator and shove him off this plane, and the Gladiator is like, dude, I'm not gonna die from this impact. And so when they do splash into the water, all of a sudden Casey is to use her powers to force Gladiator to be thinking that he's gonna be going underwater to save these underwater people that desperately need his help. But weirdly, we have, like, these characters that look very much like either Little Mermaid or Finding Nemo, weirdly. So, like, there's a whole weird kind of visual here. So now Ghost is trying to go on and trying to crack this this number combination thing, and he just can't figure it out. So the Ghost is telling the Heat, it's like, well, hey man, we're just gonna have to go with Plan C. And so, like, okay, Plan C. And so Johnny again is to kind of take over his power, and is, I guess, to plan on just kind of crashing this plane, because what else can they really do here? So that way they can stop the plane from getting to where they're supposed to go. And so really that's how we end this last episode, with, like, us kind of having a cliffhanger moment of, oh no, like, are they going to make it out of here? Are we going to get TK and he's going to be alive for this next heist? Or if he's not going to be alive, are they going to find somebody else with that same similar power set? We'll find out in the next episode. So yeah, so that's all that I'm going to possibly say about this one. Really enjoyed this show. It's kind of weird how again, like Jupiter Legacy was just this, man, like why couldn't they have like gone on, cuz like god, like Jupiter's Legacy like had such cardboarding like heroes to where when we got the villain side of things, it's all but fun. Like it's like I don't know, like plus also I think we should do much more, like we should root for the villains. Like I think Venom stories or just other kind of stories that focus much more on the bad side of things rather than the good. Like I think that those are much better off. Like look at the boys, how instead of focusing on the seven, which is to be this superhero group, we instead focus on the boys that are trying to put a wrench into the superhero group. And I think that's just so much more interesting. I think that's such a more interesting story. But with that said, I'm also going to get the heck out of here so I can put this out for the day and go on my way to say goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.